Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Barger-Ranney, class of 2002. Welcome to the Sister Stewards of Mother Earth panel. I have the honor of introducing this panel as a proud member of the We Lead Advisory Board. You may have heard by now, We Lead is our women's philanthropy initiative. We are really working to close an important gender gap in giving at Williams, and that is the number of alumni fund gifts at the leadership level of $2,500 or more. I'm not here to talk much about money, but I think when we think about really challenging issues of our time, like the one that we'll be talking about this morning, climate change and the environment, it's really obvious to me why a strong Williams matters for that kind of future. It's so important to have a liberal arts framework, the ability to approach complex issues with critical thinking and creativity, and there really is no greater need for that than in the environmental movement. So with that, I'm so delighted that we will now get to learn from this panel of leaders in the environmental space. I'm here to turn it over to Sarah St. Antoine, class of 88, Elizabeth Chun-He Lee, class of 01, Linda Von Muchis, class of 03, and our moderator, Zilka Center Director, Tanya Srbodnik. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I hope your conference is going well so far. I'm really joined by three wonderful, strong women in the environmental sphere, and they've been introduced already. But we're going to start actually with a little bit of an activity, and I'll hand over the microphone to Lindy to guide us through that.
Okay. All right. Can I stand up or should I sit down? I want to stand up because, I teach best that way. So I'm Lindy von Muchis. I have the privilege, I always say, of running the three-ring circus that is the Harvard Sustainability Master's Degree Program. It's wild. There are 2,700 students that take classes in our program every year because many of those classes are open enrollment. And so one of my challenges and joys is how we actually get people to think about how environmentalism is part of their lives already, every single day. So this is an exercise that I cannot take credit for. This was a concept pioneered by Dr. Ayanna Johnson, who is a marine biologist and also author and has a wonderful TED Talk on the climate Venn diagram, this card that you all have. So I will try to do it justice. She does it much better than I do it. But as Sarah was saying, one of the key skills in being an effective environmental leader is to be able to tell stories and do that authentically and share that passion that you have for the work with people in a way that resonates with them. Nobody likes being lectured at. Nobody likes being told that their car is bad for the environment or what they're eating is bad for the, right? People want to connect with stories and they want to hear why you care about the environment. So this is a fun exercise to get your brain jogging here on what's at the center of your climate Venn diagram. What is important to you? What do you want to be important to you? So I invite you all to fill out these three parts of the Venn diagram. The first has nothing to do with climate action. Just what brings you joy? What are you good at? Like what makes you happy every morning? Is it your dog? That's okay, right? That's usually the first thing I see in my face in the morning, and it brings me joy. The next part of the Venn diagram is, what are you good at, right? What's your superpower? We all have at least a couple of them. One of mine is bringing people together, introducing them to each other to make the magic happen. That's a superpower. That's something you can be good at. It doesn't have to be, environmental engineering. And the last circle is what needs doing. What do you think is important, right? What's right now an issue that you wish more people would care about? And then think about how to bring those things together in the middle of the Venn diagram. And I'm going to give you all a couple minutes to do that and stop talking at you. But in the middle is really the thing that you can do to advance climate action. And I'll share with you that for me, one of the big revelations in my career, which started out as an environmental lawyer, not as an educator, not in academia, was that I actually love teaching people about environmental science. And I love teaching people about environmental justice. And so that, I tell the students, is at the center of my Venn diagram, and teaching them how to think and ask deeper, bigger questions is what's really important to me. So I invite you to fill one out for yourself. We'll give you 90 seconds more, and then we'll get started with our panel. And we'll come back to this exercise, don't worry. It's not really homework, but, you know, it might count.
Thank you. Well, 90 seconds go by fast, huh? I want to use this exercise to ask our panelists what they filled into their circles. So, Liz, why don't you start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you all. Liz, class of '01 and not an environmental studies major. So, what brings me joy? Hiking, pine cobbles, that's a great place to be. Being in deep conversations, that gives me a lot of joy. And seeing justice take place, right, in different spaces, just celebrating that gives me a lot of joy. And what am I good at? I come from the advocacy world. I've worked in human rights, on theology, gender justice, so I'm pretty decent at that. Coalition spaces, organizing, trying to sort out like what are solutions. What do I think needs doing? We need just transition. We need a just transition in our climate change and our energy. So that has led me into climate action to focus around a just energy for all, right, campaign that we've been doing within our organization. So that's been kind of the accumulation thus far.
Wonderful. Thank you. How about you, Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Singh-Antoine from class of '88. And what brings me joy is reading and writing stories. I love the beauty of the natural world and getting out into it any way I can, especially spotting wildlife, conversations with friends, and joy of sharing. What am I good at? My only skill pretty much is writing. And at this point, I think I figured out that my favorite secret pastime, which is rhymed verse, is still slightly better than Chat GPT. So fingers crossed I can hold out on that. But I slightly have another skill of, I think, of listening. And what needs doing to me is saving the real and wondrous and essential world, the non-virtual world, and making sure we stay aware of it and its powers.
Great. Thank you. And Lindy, you shared a little bit already. Do you want to add to that?
Excuse me. So I think one of the things that's always been at the center of my Venn diagram, and I didn't realize it until a couple of years ago, was that I really like protecting nature for people to enjoy. And it started in one of my first jobs working for John Kerry, like writing legislation for a trail system from Maine to Florida. And it ended until recently in academia with me working at the Trust for Public Land, doing a lot of advocacy work on protecting trails and increasing parks in the country. So, yeah, like that.
Thank you. And as you could glean from this already, our panelists today have truly rich biographies, and I encourage you to read them in the booklet. I'd like to follow up with the question about how do each of you approach change making and have become change agents yourself? Okay.
I'll go first. My story is kind of in two parts, with beginning in environmental education and ending up in more literature and fiction. I emerged from Williams super fired up for environmental work, and I thought that I would bring my writing skills to creating educational materials. I worked for a lot of the big nonprofit conservation organizations like National Wildlife Federation and World Wildlife Fund. It seemed to me that in terms of sort of achieving the large-scale change, that if I was writing activities for teachers to use and they got out to hundreds and thousands of teachers, and then they worked with thousands and hundreds of thousands of kids, that would be a way of building an informed, environmentally literate citizenry, and it would take out into the world. But I had some concerns. First of all, I couldn't see that happening. That was a little strange. But also, I was meeting very young kids who were stuffed with knowledge, who could tell you what chlorofluorocarbons were and talk about the demise of the rainforest. But I was just, I had thoughts about like what happens when you have knowledge without experience. And I even had a conversation well after graduation with one of my environmental professors here who said she was kind of seeing a change in the cohorts coming in with kids who knew much more about environmental issues, but did not have particularly strong relationships as much with places they had come to know personally and gotten to roam and care for. And she had some concerns about how that would affect their long-term commitments. And also, my own love of the natural world had happened partly through stories. I met my first bears with blueberries for Sal, and I sped across the Arctic with Julie and her wolves, and that had been such a key part for me. So, full of questions, I landed in graduate school and had one of those amazing, life-changing single lectures. Believe it or not, I stumbled into a lecture by an ethnobotanist who said, you know, the restoration of the natural world really needs to be accompanied by restoring, which he said was, we need to be telling the stories about what's living around us and our connection with that. And I had an internship with him, and I met an educator from the Tohono O'odham Nation who said, stories are power in our community, and it has been narratives that we tell that make us a community, that make us aware of nature around us, that build concern and a kind of code of ethics. And I was so moved by all this new thinking that I pivoted at that point away from curriculum writing to collecting stories, editing volumes of stories about the natural world of different regions of the country, and writing my own stories. So I had this hope that what I was doing was maybe something more foundational for change, which is through story, both the knowledge and the heart side of things, of getting people aware and curious and full of the wonder of the natural world, so that they might go out and be explorers and honor diversity of cultural traditions and diversity of nature and how the survival of both are quite intertwined.
Thank you. Lindy.
I think, Sarah, you've picked up a very important idea that I will expand on in terms of change making, which is this idea of the power of stories and the power of ideas. I had a student who is the head of Hewlett-Packard's e-waste division in my class a couple of semesters ago. And 2 months ago, I chatted with him just to say, you know, how's it going? How are you doing? You're getting close to graduation. And he said, yeah, you know, and I really loved your class. And I didn't know how important trees were until you told me. And I said, it made me laugh. And I thought, what? He's like, no, I didn't. He's like, now I look at them and I think, how many of them are on this street? And is it equitable? And I thought to myself, you know, the statistic that 100 million Americans don't have a park within a 10-minute walk of their house, the statistics around neighborhoods that have been historically marginalized and disinvested in, not having enough tree canopy, you can tell people those things, those facts. It's a lot better if you can tell them stories about how an idea like that actually transforms that community. And so I think it's so powerful to share stories with people as a way to make change, because when you tell somebody, here's what happened to this community when we turned the schoolyard, so most of America's schoolyards at public schools are parking lots, right? They're just asphalt lots. And there was a school in Oakland where on an 81 degree Fahrenheit day, the parking lot that the kids play in is actually 112 degrees Fahrenheit during their recess. So you go to the school and all the kids are standing up against the building under the tiny little bit of roof that gives them shade, and that's recess. That's not recess, right? And so they don't do as well on test scores, on those standardized tests as kids with playgrounds. They don't do as well just generally in school. So we put a playground, a real playground, right? We covered the surface and we added some trees. And now those kids are doing better on tests. The detention rate is down 37% in that school. When the kids are supposed to get detention, instead the principal sends them out to the garden and makes them work in the garden for an hour. And then they come back and they're ready to be in school again. And they're not just sitting in a classroom looking at a chalkboard. And so, yeah, trees are important, but it's more important to tell people why and how. And I think if you're a good environmental advocate, you can make that relatable to people, which is why I love this exercise. But I'm sure that Elizabeth knows a lot about telling proper stories when she does her environmental advocacy.
Yes, that's right. I'm sure that resonated with you. Why
Yeah.
don't you share with us?
Sure, I appreciate that so much. And when you were speaking about the heat, so I can share a little bit about my story. So I grew up in New York City, Queens, so Muncie, Lenape, Canarsie, Matinecock, unceded land. Just want to recognize that first of all. And we lived in an apartment. And talking about heat, we lived in a rented apartment, and we could not afford to turn on our AC in the 90s, right? So energy burden, because energy burden is a term where 6% or more of your household, take-home pay is used for energy. The average nationally is around 3%, 2 to 3%. But if your family is experiencing energy burden or higher or severe, is 6% or more. So my family was part of that. So it's 90 degrees above in New York City. We could not turn on the AC, right? Because it would just cost so much. Are we going to pay rent? Are we going to have food? Are we going to pay the bills, right? And there are millions of people who are suffering with energy burden. And we want 100% renewable energy transition, right? We need to electrify absolutely. But, and I think this is really important for me in terms of as a change maker, where is the equity and justice, right? If the cost of electricity goes up, are we going to have parameters and measures so that there is equity, right? So we're not having energy poverty in the United States. When the sun, solar is readily available, wind is readily available, but the costs are going up. And why are the costs going up? Because utilities are in control of how much we pay, right? And there are public service commissions and commissioners, they're in every state, and they determine how much our electricity costs. Often, the care about the community and what is equitable, what is affordable is not considered. And that's the case in New York, right? So I want to share a quote in terms of change making. Helen Keller once said, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." So energy burden, we need to move towards 100% renewable energy, absolutely. But if I do it alone, sometimes there's unintended consequences. Or if I call my public service commissioner, hello, you need to think about rates as you move forward, et cetera, they may take that. But if I am calling with dozens, with hundreds of other people in a particular day, we create a pivotal moment of pressure for change, right? So my individual action, randomly done, is one thing, may not lead to huge impact. But if I coordinate my effort with others that are doing the work, and we look at the larger systemic picture, right? We just don't want 1.5, that's very important. But surely we want a world that is just, right? That we can all have access to energy. And so I think that's where I've seen the value of change making of let's do it together. What is our joy? What is our source? And how can we partner with frontline communities, with environmental justice communities, communities that can't afford energy, that exist even in our own neighborhood, right? In New York, that's certainly the case. With COVID, things have gotten so much worse. So how can we do the both and? We want to advocate for justice, 100% renewable energy, and affordability simultaneously. And so I think that's part of the work that I've been really enjoying getting involved in.
And what comes through here is really that continuum of taking individual action, but also advocating and working together towards systemic change. I want to ask Lindy and Sarah, where on that continuum do you see yourself?
As Liz was talking, I was thinking about, I think there's another idea, this idea that you lift up good ideas in this movement, right? And for me, the biggest idea is that Environmentalism isn't, or sustainability, that sustainable future isn't us like living in caves with candles, right? Like, we don't have to give up and be in these bleak circumstances. In fact, actually, it leads to greater prosperity for all of us, in theory, right? And maybe there's some giving up for some people, but it's a small fraction of people, and they have a lot already. But even those people, right? It doesn't mean they have to give up everything. And I think one of the things that's so radical about sustainability is this idea that the system doesn't serve most of the people, and it certainly doesn't serve the planet. So how can we bring the good ideas on how to break and redesign that system so that it actually does achieve those outcomes of better profits for things that are environmental goods, better justice, better equity? And I think that one of the things that feels always important to me as part of that movement continuum is making sure that those good ideas have the chance to be heard. Whether that means bringing conversations about environmental justice to a university that has only 2 classes on environmental justice and is one of the largest universities in the world, right? Or whether that means shouting those ideas at my local congressperson as part of my work at the Sierra Club, potentially, or whether that means writing. I think it's really about lifting up really good ideas that need to be heard and that need to get equal airtime. Right? Like, I love to always talk about how under the Trump administration, more coal-fired power plants were retired than under any other administration, right? The one administration most dedicated to keeping those alive didn't manage it. Why? Because the economics didn't support subsidizing that industry anymore. And so it's not that, we need to do this radical, we just need to let those good ideas thrive.
I want to lift up Lindy's answer and let you go on to the next one. That was fantastic.
Too long, sorry.
Not at all.
That is great. Thank you. I now have a bit more of a specific question for each of our panelists. And then I want to start with you, Sarah. Last year, you published your latest novel, Front Country, about a teenage girl's struggles with climate anxiety, growing up, and finding her place in community. How does the book connect with what you shared with us so far?
Sure. Well, and it also does connect, I guess, a little to the previous question, because it was about 10 or 12 years ago that I was doing some volunteering with climate action at the same time that I was building my fiction career for young people. And I asked myself, or more honestly, my 10-year-old, 8-year-old daughter asked me, if I could bring a climate story together, a novel about climate change. And I actually, at that point, didn't think I could. I thought a book that's about raising alarms or telling you about an issue or encouraging you to drive less didn't feel like literature. I just felt like it was loading it with too much of an agenda. So I put it, I was going to say on the back burner, but that's like a weird pun. So I put it off to the side. And the world changed so much, so fast. And all of a sudden, the alarm bells were ringing so widely. Climate disasters were on so many people's doorsteps. And people, and young people in particular, were already shaken. Right now, 75% of young people in a global survey say they find the future frightening. I just at that point felt like there was a different role that I could play in my fiction. I wanted to write a book about a young person who is shaken, and I wanted to write a book for other young people who are feeling shaken. And so I took that on as my project. Front Country is a novel. It more and more seems to be kind of 12 to adult is what I'm getting as my feedback from my audience. And it's about a kid like one who could end up at Williams, who is smart and attuned and highly sensitive to what is happening, and and she's rocked off her usual activities, just shaken by what the future holds and not sure where she takes her next step. And as she starts to disengage from some of the activities that defined her life, maybe it's not varsity sports, maybe it's not that special STEM project over the summer, maybe the grades aren't so perfect, her parents freak out a little bit. And the book is a lot about those relationships of what she sees as her moment of really coming into her own understanding of the world, and how she figures that out vis-a-vis parents who still do have their eye on her next college life experience. And I wanted to put her in a setting where she is connecting to the wilder world and what that means to be with other young people in relationship to each other and to that space. I think in many ways she as a character is both falling in love with the world and the joy of the world at the same time that she is reckoning with its potential demise. And so that's sort of the strain of it. But finding the purpose and finding the joy is very much a part of the narrative. So as a mom, I have this urge with my own daughters that sometimes extends in an impossible way to want to take all these kids who are struggling right now and just wrap my arms around them and say, yes, I get it, and I feel your pain, and you are so wise, and let's figure out how to take the next steps, because I don't think we end with paralysis. I don't think we accomplish all this really important work with paralysis, and I think life holds extraordinary, joyful, meaningful moments, even in the midst of so much that is really tricky and confusing. And part of our jobs, I think as adults, is to remind kids of the possible and to help them see beyond the ways in which they are, quite shaken. So on some level, I hope my novel is a little bit of that embrace.
Lindy, I'd like to follow up on something you mentioned already. As director of the Harvard Extension Program on Sustainability and Global Development, and previously in leadership positions with organizations such as the Environmental Defense Fund, the Trust for Public Land, and the Sierra Club, how can these prominent, well-established organizations, some facing their own legacies of exclusion and discrimination, effectively work to address environmental injustice and racism? In 2 minutes. In 2 minutes.
I feel like this is like the Miss America pageant. Okay, all right. It's going to be like world peace now. No, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think it's been really interesting to work at that range, right? Sierra Club to Harvard. It's a big range. And sometimes when I get up in meetings at Harvard and I use my pronouns or I do a land acknowledgement, people are like, what are you doing? And I think for me, again, it's just about the ideas. It's like, hey, guess what, everyone? We're all actually a little better off in this meeting, understanding where we are, what the land is that we're sitting on, and having a little bit of a connection back to it and the story of it, right? And so it's been really exciting to see Harvard address its own legacy of Harvard used to sell and own slaves. Harvard has indigenous peoples' remains in the museums and in its archives, starting to do that work of understanding how it as an institution can be honest and tell those stories and actually repair some of the damage it's done to those communities. But I think there's still a long way to go, because understanding your own history and being able to talk about it comfortably, and even if you're uncomfortable, is only the start. I think the next step is really thinking about, well, how do you then do something proactive? And I think each one of us struggles with that. So when I was at Sierra Club, I thought, okay, I'm pretty evolved, right? I'm a queer woman of color. Like, here we go. No. Those staff, they put me in my place real quick, those 20-year-old activists. And, I was too corporate. I'd worked in a big law firm. I'd worked with Republicans. I was the man. And I was like, wow, I have never been the man. Ever. But I took that as an opportunity, after about 3 minutes of feeling uncomfortable, I kind of looked at it as a learning opportunity, and I thought to myself, okay, what can these kids, they were all kids, teach me about who I could be, right? And I think being open, it was terrifying. They made me read all kinds of books about racism, and I was like, I thought I knew a lot about that. Lived experience, no. There are experiences I haven't lived, right? And so, and recognizing the privilege that I carry with having gone to a place like Williams and being able to be in this room and being able to like put on a suit and go work with Paul Ryan on some tax legislation, right? Not everybody gets to do that. And so understanding how I can talk about that in my own life, even as someone with so many identities that, you know, you think, oh, she's got it. She doesn't need to do any work on that. Yeah, no, I do. And I think being open to how you as a person carry yourself in the world and a little bit self-aware, and it's really okay to not know the answer. Like, I will tell you, it's really okay not to know and to maybe be the man a little bit, as long as you're willing to say, okay, teach me, right? What's your perspective? What can I learn from you? And ask that question. As you said, your superpower is listening. Ask that question before you decide to share your own perspective. I think that's the biggest thing I learned.
Yes.
Life lesson from the children at the Sierra Club.
Let's all be the man sometimes. Last, but definitely not least, before we open up the room for questions from you, the audience, Liz, your approach, the important issues of climate change and climate justice through the lenses of gender, human rights, and theological analysis. How does this perspective differ from and sometimes yield better outcomes than solutions based solely on economic, market, and technological fixes?
Yeah, I know we're like near time, so I'm going to try to make this quick. We did this activity, and a lot of it is asking, like, what are our core values, right? What is important to us? And I think that is a constant question when we have a gender analysis, eco-feminist analysis, eco-womanist analysis, a human rights analysis, saying, okay, there are all these solutions that are coming out. Is it harming others? Is it doing no harm? How do I prioritize, right? And electric vehicles, let me just give a very quick example, right? We need to electrify. Transportation, major source of climate pollution in the US, right? So we got to electrify, absolutely. But where are these minerals coming from, these critical minerals, right? They're mostly on indigenous land, or in the United States. They're mostly near Native American locations, right? 35 miles nearby. And many are resisting. The people of Red Mountain, indigenous communities are resisting and saying no. And there's treaties, right, that we're violating, actually. There's something known as free, prior, and informed consent. So, yes to electric vehicles, but other places are working off of a circular economy instead of a linear economy. We don't need to extract. We can actually require and ask vehicle and battery manufacturers to think about recycling, reuse, right, putting that type of pressure. So we could do the both and. We know that women in mining extractive locations are disproportionately harmed, especially Native Americans. Higher rape cases, higher missing, murdered women, indigenous women take place in those regions, right? So there's a gender component as well. Where are the funds going to? So I think asking those questions are so important. That's why it's beneficial. At the same time, you're speaking about legacy in a place like Harvard, right? I work for a women's faith-based organization, a Christian organization that has done incredible harm in many ways. The doctrine of discovery allowed for colonization, right? And the church has said, you can take land, commodify it, extract it, and people who are not Christians can also be commodified and enslaved, right? So in many ways, the work is internal. How are we in the church doing our work of reparations and justice, saying, wow, we don't have the answers. If anything, we're making amends, because we have been perpetrators in the process. And so part of my work is saying, church, in our faith communities, we have a lot of work to do, and this is our act of repentance and justice. So it's not like an add-on. It's not a nice thing to do, right? For us, in some ways, it's a reckoning and saying, we incorporate this. And going to, Sarah, your point earlier about there's so much eco-anxiety that's going on, right? And so finding places to mourn together, to lament and process and say, okay, right, it can be so paralyzing at times. I wake up sometimes, I suspect some of us may too, of like, what is the state of the world? What is happening right now? But we can do this together. And I think that's where, going back to what are our core values? How do we want to move together? And I'm very much looking forward to, when we have another 20-year anniversary, 50-year anniversary, et cetera, that we can say, yeah, we at Women of Williams have done incredible work together in bringing about change.
What a great note. To conclude the moderated portion of the panel, and we'd now like to open it up to questions from you.
Hi, I'm Eileen Dowling. I'm class of '84. I live in New York City, which is something to do with my question. But I first want to say, as a matter of joy, I'm sitting here with my junior advisors, who we have not seen since they graduated from college, and two very dear friends from the class of '84. So that's joy in and of itself. For those of you who don't read the New York papers, we have a crisis of migration going on in the country, in the world. A lot of it is driven by climate. Climate is an underlying factor: war, economic instability. I'd love to hear. New York last week had 4,200 migrants come into the city. We have a open policy to, what is it called, Liz? A shelter. A sanctuary city, and we're a sanctuary state. And it's tragic. You see busloads of people getting off the Port Authority, and people are desperately trying to help these people. But I really wanted to know from this panel, which is such provocative discussion, like, what should we be doing? What can we be doing as people in the audience that, to help from a just perspective? I think, like, this is not good for society. There are big reforms that need to be done, but is there any hints from your own personal experience or the work that you do that can help inform us, like, how can we be more helpful in what is a bad situation?
I can start us off. Yeah, this is climate justice. Climate crisis is an injustice multiplier, right? And we see that, and women are disproportionately impacted. So absolutely, and we're feeling it in New York, and there are organizations engaged in that work, right? Doing that intersectional work. So I think that is where we can get involved. First, find out who's working on it. And then I think some of us, may have heard the babies down the river analogy, right? There's babies that are coming down the river, and you pick one up, and the next day there's two. You pick them up and you help them. The next day they keep on coming down the river. And some of us are helping, and others are asking, why is that happening, right? And then others then go up and so they're trying to figure out how to stop it and ensure that those babies are protected and find out the systems, right? I'm saying that because I think it's the both and, right? We need immediate relief and shelter and support and transition, fight against the xenophobia of marginalization that happens, and be in solidarity and really prioritize those communities, what they need, right? So we need justice in that. And we need to look at why is that happening and be in solidarity, both at the global level, at the federal and state, local level. But the important thing is not just to read about it and be like, oh gosh, this is terrible, and then move on to the next issue, right? I think is actively looking, okay, in my state or city, who's working on this? And how can I get involved? And then making an intentional point to call your legislator and do it with a few other friends. Again, if they get a call around in one day, 10 calls on the same issue, and you could all be sitting next to each other. They do a little relay, right? I'm going to call in the first 15 minutes you call, because you don't want to bombard at the same time. It could actually have a huge impact, again, versus just doing it alone. So let's do it together.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to that question was going to be, there's an election coming up. And one of the biggest challenges right now is the fact that the United States is not a leader on any of these issues. Really. I mean, I hate to say that because I'm very, very proud to be an American. And I want this country to do that work. And I think we are in a existential moment right now for our democracy and in an existential moment for our climate and climate action. And I think what you can do is go to another state and work on their election, right? That's not illegal. I think this next election is going to be one of the most consequential in our country in terms of climate action and issues like immigration. And whatever you can do to be involved, even if it's a small thing. I spent a weekend last election calling LGBTQ voters in Florida. I think I called about 1,000 people over the weekend, right? And if half of them went out and voted who weren't planning to vote in the first place, that made a difference. And voter suppression is such a huge issue right now. I would say think about what you can do in this upcoming election, as well as what you can do in your world, in your corner of the world.
Another question?
This isn't a question, it's a little bit selfish. I understand the frustration of how do we take climate action today? Because people are marching in the streets and they're they get to the end of the march and then what do? So a couple of years ago, I'd been in the financial markets for 25 years and saw the wave of money and interest in going into doing something about climate. But what I saw was that it wasn't really, they weren't able to put together really impactful investments. And, climate became my passion. I'm worried. And, for the future, I've had a beautiful world to live in. I want I want the next generations to have that as well. So I co-founded a company with a couple of folks to do just that. It's called Raise Green. We are a crowdfunding portal dedicated to democratizing access to capital for folks that are working in the climate space. Anything, think solar array on a school all the way to a new technology. And then on our fully online platform, open it up for investment to anybody in the United States that's 18 years and older. For as little as $100, you can jump on our website today, pick a project or a company that's doing something that speaks to you. The story is incredibly important. And in 2 seconds, you can invest. And it's a financial investment. But the issue is we fundamentally believe we need to give everybody a chance to get involved and do something, because this is a systemic change. Everybody's got to have this opportunity. And so just sharing with you that this is one little part that I've dedicated my life to now, and just wanted to share that.
That's great.
And I so appreciate you commenting on that, because I suspect most of us have investments in some form. How we move to ESG, how we ask questions, when we're voting, proxies, right? How are we aligning? So I think these are very concrete things, because we are supporting either solutions or we're part of the problem, right? So thank you for sharing that.
One last question.
Hi, I'm Sharon Kaplan from the class of 90. What do you say to someone when you say something to them about it's important to recycle, it's important to conserve, to compost, whatever, and they say, well, what we do makes no difference because most of the, the pollution and the bad stuff is happening because of, corporate America and all those, big entities that we have no control over. So it doesn't even make, a raindrop of a difference if we're doing this. So, why bother?
I can try. So whenever I talk to someone like that, I say, you're right. You're right. You driving less, you the one person, you recycling is not going to solve the climate crisis. The people who are perpetuating the status quo that is driving emissions have billions of dollars, make billions of dollars a month on that, right? They are industries and they are larger forces than what you and I can shift individually. I inspire them to think about what Liz said, which is, sure, you alone can't do that much, but you with your whole neighborhood, yes. And I tell them the story of my town, Natick, Massachusetts, small town. We decided to stop landfilling our waste and start a system, and I was at Williams actually when this came about, where you buy the trash bag So you pay for each trash bag you throw away. And it took a couple years to get that measured passed. Within the first year, 47% less waste generated by the town. That's, as a town, we have made a huge climate impact, right? So I tell people, look, yes, you alone, you kind of are a drop in the bucket. That's true. But a bunch of drops and the bucket gets full. And that's what you should hang on to, is not the, oh, woe is me, I can't do this because I'm trying to do this on my own. You should be thinking about, how can I get other people to do this with me? And how can I inspire other people to do this with me? And then I say, that's your challenge. And sometimes that lands.
So we're unfortunately, really unfortunately, out of time. But I hope that this panel and this conversation leaves you energized, recharged, and motivated to take action and to continue the conversations amongst each other and with our wonderful panelists during this conference. So with that, thank you from us to you, and give our panelists a warm round of applause.